Hi, everybody. So, here we are, the last lecture of the year. Can you believe that? I know many of you will miss lectures over the summer, but fear not, they're all on YouTube, so you can always go back and watch some AP History lectures over the summer. So, I know you'll all be doing that. You can download them onto your tablets, your phones. That would just be weird. All right, so let's finish off chapter 22. The 14th Amendment was where we left off. So in 1866, Congress voted basically to extend the Freedmen's Bureau, which was that government agency which helped the freed slaves be educated and get homes and things like that. And they also passed a civil rights bill to fight back against the black codes, which were being passed in the South, which basically made two tiers of citizens: those who were complete citizens who were completely free, and those who were under these black codes who needed things like they weren't allowed to own a gun, they couldn't vote, they had to get permission to go from town to town. Andrew Johnson, being a Southern Democrat, vetoes both bills. And Congress actually overrode both vetoes. So if you have, I want to say it's 2/3 of Congress can override a president's veto. If I'm wrong about that, I'm very sorry. I'm sure Mitchell knows off the top of his head. He can get back to me. It's the first time in history that a president's veto was overridden. So Congress feared that the civil rights of the freedmen would never actually be respected. So they passed the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment does a couple things. One, it says that the federal government is in charge of protecting the civil rights of all Americans. So even if your state is violating your rights, the federal government can step in and stop it. It defined the meaning of citizenship for all Americans. It allowed these freedmen, they made them citizens, basically. And it clearly laid out what would happen to southern states who violated the rights of African Americans. Really, the heart of the 14th Amendment is equal protection under the law. So it doesn't matter who you are. The law says the amendment says that you shall have equal protection under the law. And under my video, you're going to find a very good video by Walter Isaacson, good author, who is going to give you a 6-minute video on the 14th Amendment in more detail. So Johnson tours the South, and what he's trying to do is basically elect congressmen who would help him defeat the 14th Amendment. And it doesn't work. The Republicans swept through Congress, regained control of every northern state, and really dominated the House of Representatives. Because remember, the North has a bigger population, especially in places like New York and Pennsylvania. I think I'm frozen. Nope, there we are. Okay. So Congress was led by a guy named Thaddeus Stevens. Now, we started the Lincoln movie. That's what we'll be doing for the next couple days after this that we have left. You'll be watching that. Thaddeus Stevens plays a very big role in that movie. He basically just steps around Johnson and passes its own plan. And it was a radical plan. It really was. It's called the Radical Reconstruction Plan of 1867, and it really was. It said that Congress could take people's land away from them, didn't allow Confederates to vote, but most importantly, I just blocked it. And there's Thaddeus Stevens right there. You'll see that Tommy Lee Jones actually looks a lot like him in the movie. He opposed a compromise. He was the most radical of all of the congressmen. He actually lived with a black woman. They never got married. But he was by far the most radical of the radical Republicans. And he actually leads an impeachment charge against Johnson, trying to remove him from office. I don't know what's going on here with my PowerPoint, but it is not functioning very well. Alright, so what the Radical Reconstruction Plan did was it created 5 military districts, and it actually put the entire South under the control of the Army. It's kind of hard to imagine today, But military district number 5 was Texas and Louisiana. Mississippi and Arkansas were number 4. Florida, Georgia, and Alabama were number 3. Number 2 was Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia had one all to its own, military district number 1. Kind of hard to imagine that happening today. It really is. Here's the problem. They could not actually enforce equality in the South. And Johnson removed everyone from his cabinet who had been left over from Lincoln's cabinet. So basically what they did was they took a very pro-equality cabinet and federal government, and Johnson replaced them with Southern Democrats. Because of this, the House voted to impeach Johnson, and he's almost removed from office. He comes within one vote of being removed from office. And he did not really commit a high crime or misdemeanor, which is the constitutional test for whether or not a person should be removed from office. They said that he violated the Tenure of Office Act, which means that you can't just remove people for political reasons, when he tried to fire Lincoln's old Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton. But it was largely not really a crime. The president can fire anyone in his cabinet at any time. You serve at the pleasure of the president. So Johnson argued that no crime had been committed, and he came within one vote of losing the presidency, but it didn't happen. Some Republicans thought it was really, really dangerous to remove a president because you disagreed with them on policy. And, you can see that's kind of out of the window today in Trump's impeachment trial, right? In the Senate, it was a party line vote. Johnson, though, does basically say, I will enforce Reconstruction, though. I'll stop trying to fight it. And he actually does. And for a very brief time, Reconstruction actually seems to be working. There's actually a ticket, so it was the hottest ticket in town. You could actually go and see the impeachment of the president. Kind of a hard thing to imagine today. All right, so let's look at reconstructing the South. So how does this impact the South? Southern whites really did want to keep the freed slaves in an inferior position. So you start to see these freedmen, as we've called them, start to push for things like, equality, the right to vote, right to own land, being educated. And many Northerners, who many were called carpetbaggers because they packed up a carpet bag, which is like a suitcase, and moved to the South, you start to see that the Southern whites are pushing back against this in a big way. And part of this is going to be because their economy is basically not set up for this at all. So what do, right? You have this entire society built on growing cash crops and selling them. What do you do now without slaves? Well, the Civil War destroys tons of southern farmland. Right? Remember, we've talked about the scorched earth, total war policy of Sherman and my boy Grant up there on the wall. The South tried in the beginning to basically replace slavery, and they tried by a contract labor system where you basically hired people, but it was way too expensive. So they basically came up with this plan called sharecropping. Black farmers who used to be slaves would work on white planters' lands, and they had to pay to help put the seed in. They could live on the land, but they had to help pay for putting the seed in, and they would only get about a quarter of the profits of the sale, even though they were doing most of the work. Well, here's the problem. If you lose a crop one year, which is going to happen, not every year is going to be productive, those freedmen were responsible for paying for some of this, and they're dirt poor. They've never been allowed to own property or have money before, and now you're basically telling them to make it on their own. And there are some real problems with this. Sharecropping becomes really the mainstay of the Southern economy. You can see the red, the orangish, and the pink means that there is at least 1 in 5 farms are sharecropped. This becomes, especially in the Carolinas, Georgia, and as you get into the deep south, this is really widespread. Families went into debt before the crop was even planted. And people had to borrow money if there was a crop failure. And they had no money to begin with. So basically people were basically enslaved again on the same land where they used to work. And here you can see this is a sharecropping family. I believe this is in the Carolinas. When I was in college, I worked at a moving company with a gentleman who grew up in South Carolina in the 50s and 60s. And he grew up sharecropping as late as the 1950s and 1960s. That's kind of hard to imagine, but it's true. So this system was not just a short-lived system. By the end of 1865, so think about it, this is basically by the end of the same year that the Civil War ends, most of the freed slaves went back to work on the plantations where they had always been enslaved. Right? That's kind of hard to imagine. They went back to work on the same land. And they were basically tied to the land still because they owed money. So they were in debt. So many people will call sharecropping slavery by a different name. You also start to see discrimination against these freedmen was very widespread. Those black codes, remember, limited where they could work, if they could vote, if they could buy land. We're not really sure of the number of murders of black Americans during this time. There were a lot, though, and groups like the Ku Klux Klan bounced up all over the South. The Army basically didn't have enough troops to stop it. Right, and this kind of gets into where we are today as a country. We have this debate that's going on over the recent killing of George Floyd that we've seen. And there's a big debate, how much have we progressed or have we stayed the same? I think the outcry against his killing is a good sign, right? That most people, the vast majority of people say, yeah, this is a really, really bad thing. People weren't saying that in 1865. Up until when I was in high school, so that's only 12, 13 years ago, the oldest Democrat in the Senate, his name was, Robert Byrd from West Virginia. He was a senator, high-ranking Democratic senator, was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. For a long time, you had to be a member of the Klan to get elected as a Democrat in the South. It was all the way up through the 1970s. I mean, that's kind of hard to imagine. These freedmen's schools that were put together by the Freedmen's Bureau were sometimes burned. The Klan ran rampant. Lynchings became common. If a black man would go vote, they would sometimes be lynched. The violence gets to be unbearable. It's really bad. And by 1867, the Southern Republican Party was formed. It was basically two groups. People who were called carpetbaggers, Northerners who moved to the South, and scalawags, those Southerners who were seen as siding with the North. You also saw some small-time white farmers, becoming Republicans because they thought there was more economic opportunity, and all black voters were Republicans in the South. Southern Republicans weren't in power for very long, but they really, really do improve the lives of these freedmen. All right, what do we want to do? There are just some pictures of voting. You actually have House and senators who were black elected in the 1860s by the Southern Republican Party. So there were black congressmen and senators in Reconstruction. It's a very racist cartoon showing the Southern perspective on these freedmen in the House and Senate. By 1870, the 15th Amendment was passed, which said that freedmen could get married and that they could vote. So actually, the 15th Amendment just says that they can vote, but later they could get married as well. Hi, Isabel. All right, so I will have to make another video another day to finish off this chapter because I only have 6 seconds left before the cutoff. Have a good day, and I'll talk to you soon.